Okay, today we're going to create a new data source. Navigate to our admin portal, click Add New, type in the title of our data source. This can be anything, and save the changes. Once we have the changes saved, the first step is to choose the output. This is the format that the data source is going to output our data. So first we're going to select one. We're going to choose WooCommerce Products syncs to a remote website. Okay, then we're going to create available items with this one. There's a few different choices. We can go over those at another time. We need to let the API know which remote websites we want to send this data output to. So we're going to use Sandbox and this one. You can have as many websites attached to it as you like. I always recommended saving your settings before we move on to the next step. Now we're going to work on the request details. Okay, so we're going to have a source type. The source type that we're using today is going to be a JSON API. There you can see there's several different choices. But today we're going to do JSON API. It's the most common. Our frequency is daily. We want to request data from this JSON API daily. The source API URL. This is the full URL to make requests to your API for data. And as you'll note, this is a .local. We have a development environment that we use for demos, but all URLs must be public facing. Our HTTP method is going to be a GET. You can see we have a few different ones, and we need to add some headers. Okay, since we're using a JSON API, we're going to set an accept header as application JSON. And then we have to have some authentication. We're going to authenticate, and we're going to use a basic username and password. You can see there's different types of headers, but we're going to use the username and password. Okay. We don't need parent keys or any subsequent requests to make this data source. So let's update and save our changes. So we're going to do a request test. Test the request. Okay. You can see our endpoint. This is the URL that's requested. Our response code is 200, which is generally successful. Message is okay. The method was get. We can view the headers that were sent to the API. We can review the full response from the API. We can review the raw data from the API. And this is the most important part here. This is the part we'll use. So we can see the raw data, we have 5 items. So in this particular array, we'll want to use the ID as our primary key. So let's remember the key for ID. And we see our process data in our primary ID. We don't have any values. So let's go down to primary ID. The remote key. This is the key that's on the remote website. How we're going to identify this. So today we'll use unique ID. It could be anything. It could be something that's already on your website, or you could just make one up. The source key, that was the key in our raw data, was ID. And we don't need to sanitize the value. Update our data source. The next field we want to map is the name So we'll remember the key name. And since we have admin settings, we want to have an admin title. We'll map the value to a dynamic value. And you can check the documentation for all these different types. But for this, we'll use dynamic value. The source key is name. And then we'll also set up our item data. We want to use the product name. Choose that. We're also going to use a dynamic value here. The source key is the same name. Let's update the data source. And we will run another test request. Okay, scroll back down to the raw data and the process data. Now you see we have a primary ID. That's unique ID with the value of 100. That's good. We have a post title, which is the title of the product. That's the key we mapped into this field.